pause and tell a pastor, Pastor, it's not that you don't know what your problems are in your church. It's that there are so many things that need your attention. You're just not sure where to start. And so what we want to do is help you understand that. It's almost like if you bought a potted plant today and you wanted to help keep that plant healthy. Well, to keep that plant healthy, there are four main things you want to pay attention to. You want to pay attention to the size of the pot that the plant's in, the nutrients that you give this plant, how much water it receives, and location. Does it need to be in the sun? Does it need to be in the shade? Does it need a little bit of both? And do we need to balance those? What are the things we should pay attention to for this to be healthy? Now, I want you to hold on to this analogy because in a few minutes, we're going to talk about what are the things we should pay attention to in the church to keep it healthy. Well, let's just pretend for a moment that we have a mixture of all of these areas to help this plant be a healthy plant. It's got a little, it's in a certain size container. These are the nutrients, the amount of water, and the sun or shade that it receives. Well, in order for this plant to grow, it's going to grow in the context of all that is provided here. But eventually, it's going to reach a barrier where it can no longer grow in its current situation. And so what are you going to do? Well, in this context, we may say, well, let's add some water. And by adding water, this plant is going to continue to grow. But then it's going to reach a barrier again. And the next time it reaches a barrier, what's the temptation going to be? The temptation is going to be, well, let's add more water because that's what we did last time. Well, I want to suggest to you that if you add water when it really needs to be relocated or put into a larger container, then you actually haven't helped your plant grow. In fact, it may be that what was once when you watered it, it helped it be healthier and grow. Now watering it actually might keep it from growing and even kill it. In the church, we do this all the time. We will be paying attention to one area of the church and think, well, that's what I did before to help it grow, and so that's what I'm going to do again. When in reality, you need to be paying attention to another area. And so we want to not just water. In this context, we're going to need to repot the plant. And when we repot the plant, it's going to continue to grow. Then eventually, it's going to reach another barrier. Now, when I reach that barrier, I cannot just be satisfied with watering and resizing the plant. Do I need more nutrients? Do I need to change its location? Or in this case, it needs to change its location. And so what we want to do in the church is ask ourselves, what are the areas that we need to pay attention to help us keep our church healthy and growing? And so what we call those observations are the 8 characteristics of a healthy church. And with the 8 characteristics of a healthy church, we're going to review these and observe these and evaluate them on a regular basis to help us know where our barriers are keeping us from growing. These 8 characteristics are characteristics that are consistent no matter what church size or denomination or location. You could be an urban church, you could be a rural church, a suburban church. It really doesn't matter. If you look down the right side of this list, these are the characteristics: leadership, ministry, spirituality, all the way down through relationships. But you'll also notice that there's a descriptive word, an adjective that's in front of each one of these. And so what we want to do is partner with you as a church to evaluate and measure how well we are doing these things. It's not just a question of leadership, or do you have a leadership plan in your church? The question is, how good of a job are you doing at empowering leaders in your church? And we want to measure how good of a job we're doing at empowering leaders. Gift-based ministry. Now, what we mean by that is we know people are volunteering and serving in the church. The question is, how good of a job are we doing at volunteering and serving in ministry in our church based on spiritual gifts? So gift-based ministry. Passionate spirituality. What we mean by that is how much of a carryover to our spiritual lives do we have what I call Monday through Saturday. And I don't know about you, but I am super Christian and I'm an outstanding disciple on Sundays in the middle of worship service. The question is, how contagious and how passionate is my spiritual life outside that context in the real world? And so we want to measure how the spiritual lives of the people in your church is beyond the Sunday experience. We also want to look at something we call effective structures. And this doesn't get real everybody excited. It doesn't make you run to the altar. Are we well organized? How good do we communicate? What are our systems and structures? How do we make decisions? How do we train people in our church? And here's what I believe. I believe nobody runs to a church and asks the question, how effective are your structures? But if your structures and your communications and your systems are ineffective, they create frustration, and you can lose good people from your church because you haven't created good structures, systems, and strategies in your church. And so we want to measure that. How effective are our structures? Another thing we want to measure is inspiring worship services. Now, we're not just talking about music here, nor are we just talking about preaching. We're actually talking about the whole experience, from the time they get in the parking lot to the time they get into your lobby to what they experience on your services. But how inspiring are your worship services? We want to measure the quality and the health of that experience. The other thing we want to look at is holistic small groups. Now, these may be off-campus groups that meet in living rooms, and these may be classes that you have inside your church. To me, it really doesn't matter. The question is, how holistic is it? It's not just providing information and having a talking head in the room just spewing out that information and everybody getting it. We're already actually educated beyond our own obedience. What we want to look at here is how applicable is the information people receiving in small groups so they can apply it to their daily lives. How relevant is it to their development as a fully devoted disciple of Jesus Christ? What kind of an impact are our small groups having in developing relationships and becoming more like Christ? We want to measure how impactful that is. Another thing we want to measure is need-oriented evangelism. Need-oriented evangelism is really saying, what kind of a job are we doing at meeting needs in our community that draw people's attention to Jesus Christ? It's that simple. And what kind of results are we receiving from that? How are we meeting needs, and what are the results we're receiving? The last thing we want to measure is what we call loving relationships. This just isn't how good are the relationships we have in our church and how are everybody just getting along and do we have a real genuine love for each other. Those are all important, but it's also measuring how do we handle conflict? How do we handle conflict resolution? Real relationships are really determined by the testing of conflict. I know in my marriage, it is not until we overcame conflict did we really have depth in our relationship. And I believe that's true in all relationships. And so we want to not only determine how people interact in a loving way, we want to understand how do people interact with each other when conflict is in question. And so we want to measure these adjectives, and we want to look at these areas and really have an understanding of how healthy our church is so that we can actually make good decisions. See, it's going back to that potted plant. If I don't understand what is needed, how can I make good strategic decisions? And so when you reach a barrier in your church where health isn't what you expect it to be and growth is not getting to where you want it to go, we want to ask ourselves, how can we determine what is needed at this moment? And a natural church development assessment of your church will provide that, and we'll have a greater understanding in each of these 8 areas and then discover what are the ones that need our attention. And so what have we learned about these quality characteristics? Well, we think that 3 things can be said of all of these with great certainty. First of all is that each one of these characteristics is a universally valid principle. That it doesn't matter if it's in the States or in a foreign country. I had the privilege of being in Russia and connecting with pastors, teaching some of this same material and understanding no matter where they are in the world, these characteristics apply to the church. And you can say so too if you're watching this today. I also want you to know that they can also be transferred to our own situation, that these aren't we are not trying to imitate what somebody else is doing. We're trying to understand just what our local church is, transfer an understanding of the 8 characteristics, but then question what is our health in each one of those areas. The last thing that we believe is that each of these have a positive relationship with both the quality and the quantitative growth of your church. Now, what do I mean by that? That if we pay attention to these 8 areas and make sure that they're as healthy as we want them to be, you're going to have a higher quality church. And here's what I know. A church of 100 that's unhealthy is no fun. A church of 100 that is healthy and has great quality to it, it's fun. If you're in a church of 500, 1,000, or 5,000, it really doesn't matter. When things are running with quality and health, it's a positive experience. When it's not healthy and things are negative, it's not a very good experience. But we also believe quality can turn into quantitative growth. We can't guarantee you numerical growth just because you do an assessment, but we believe that if you pay attention to the areas that need attention to it, and we have good strategies, that over time, having a healthy church with quality attention put on these areas, you will see quantitative growth in your church. I said earlier, healthy churches are growing churches, and we believe quality can be measured. What I've learned as a church leader is that oftentimes we really don't know how to evaluate if a church is healthy or not. We just use our intuition and our own observations. But I'm suggesting to you today, we actually can evaluate the quality of your church and measure it and then compare it down the road on whether or not we're moving the needle. And so that's important for us to be able to do. Now listen, it's not a fix-all. We understand that there's a lot of seeing a church grow and be healthy that's way out of our control. Mark 4:26-29 reminds us that a man scatters seed, the seed sprouts and grows, and all by itself the soil produces grain. We can work really hard as pastors and church leaders to produce change and effectiveness in our church. But what we really want to do is help you provide a better seed and the right kind of soil so that all by itself the church will produce the fruit that you're looking for. I believe there's a harvest that is still to come. And the only way we're prepared for that harvest to come is to plant the right kind of seeds in the right kind of soil. And like the plant before that we mentioned, we've got to know where it is that we should observe so we can make the right decisions needed to grow the church. I want you to think of your church like this barrel. This barrel is slatted. There's slats all around it, but on the inside of it, it's holding water. I want you to imagine your church service attendants being that water, and each one of these slats being one of the 8 characteristics. Part of what a survey is going to do is let us understand the size of your plank. And let's just say, for instance, one of these tall planks, maybe this one right here, it's really tall. You see my mouse going there. And let's say that in your church is inspiring worship. And you hit a barrier in your church and you are in an unhealthy season. It's just not growing the way you want to, but you realize, man, we do worship and music really, really good. And we're just going to get better at that. Well, getting better at this slat and getting it to be taller doesn't help your service attendance grow. You're still going to leak where? You're going to leak where the lowest slat is. We call that the minimum factor. And when it leaks out there, it doesn't matter what you do in the other areas, you're still going to lose there. What we want to do is identify what is the minimum factor. Maybe for your church is gift-based ministry. And so we can make Sunday mornings better and better and better, but if we're not addressing getting people serving by their gifts, then our church is not going to be healthy and we're not going to see the growth that we want. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to leverage where we're healthy and go down here and check this minimum factor out and do some strategic, intentional things to see that slat get taller so our barrel can hold more. Man, I believe your church can hold more, but let's don't make it guesswork. Let's take our faith, let's put some facts to it, and let's see our church become everything that it can be. So how does Church Health Solutions do this?